All right, we're live.
Okay, let's call this meeting to order. This is the January 11th, 2024 Finance and Audit Committee. Happy New Year to everybody.
Happy New Year.
So do I not have to say that anymore? We're done. Teresa, will you call roll?
Absolutely. Mr. Gordon Cook.
Here.
Mr. Bob Johnson.
Here.
Dr. Yummy Pandolfi.
Here.
Ms. Michelle Wyckoff. Mr. Rama Thieves.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay. Agenda was out. If there are no changes, I'd ask for a motion to a second to approve the agenda.
So move.
Second. Teresa, will you just take the roll?
Mr. Gordon Cook.
Yes.
Mr. Robert Johnson.
Aye.
Dr. Yummy Pandolfi.
Yes.
Ms. Michelle Wyckoff. Mr. Rama Thieves.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries.
Okay, next item is the minutes from December. I had one change, which I think Teresa took care of. If there are no changes or additions? Yes?
I move the minutes be approved from the December 14th, 2023 meeting.
Second?
Second.
And second, and Teresa, will you take the vote?
Mr. Gordon Cook.
Yes?
Mr. Robert Johnson.
Aye.
Dr. Yummy Pandolfi.
Aye.
Ms. Michelle Wyckoff.
Aye.
Hi, Michelle.
She's here.
Hi. Sorry I'm late.
That's all right. Mr. Rama Thieves.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries.
Okay. First on the agenda, do we have? All right. Yeah. Ellis and Eric online. So the next item on the agenda is the Prop L contingency usage. And I wanted to, I guess, review this in current, relative to current status. And just, I know it's a standard part of the instruction, but just for a little background and to get everybody on the same page. If you remember the last April board meeting, there were, and the doc is up there. I presented what was all the work packages that had been approved, and the contingency, the construction contingency, including a little bit of design, was about 5.9 million. Okay. There was also another page, which was page 9 of that April presentation, showing that the current estimate of the cost, this is as of May 2020, was 92.4 million. The original budget of 84.5 million, so it's right short of $8 million on an excess in 2020. The board did not see these summaries that, at least as I understood and that I could find. And so that was a new finding. So one of the things in the contract, and I know Aaron is dealing with this, and I'm not here to beat anybody up, but one of the provisions of the Dunn contract, and this is not in board docs, but I just want to put this up there, is in 2.2.4, which talks about the guaranteed maximum and the contingency. And I'm just going to give you the brief. In preparing the construction manager, that is done, guaranteed maximum price proposal for each discrete project, construction manager shall include its contingency or the construction manager's exclusive use to cover those costs considered reimbursable as the cost of the work, but not included in a change order. Okay? Construction managers' contingencies shall not exceed 10% of the GMP, the guaranteed price, for each project or bundled projects. Okay, this is a critical sentence. Unused discrete project or bundled project contingency funds shall be rolled over and be added to contingency funds available to owner and construction manager for inclusion in GMP amendments for future projects as agreed upon by the construction manager and owner. So I think my understanding at the time was that each project stood on its own. I don't know how this was handled. I know from some of the documents I saw, it looked like some contingency was being moved around, but for where we are. And when we talked about this in April, the 4 projects that were open had about $1.5 million of available contingency. Some of that has been used. What's on the schedule in the finance section or later on in section 7.5 is about 700,000. So I just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page as to who controls this, how it's being used. Does this contract provision, is it J.E. Dunn's sole authority to handle the contingency, or is it a joint, or are you guys handling it a little bit differently than what is in the contract? So then that's my cue up, and I'll let you guys talk.
Right. So to answer these questions and maybe give some context, the contingency use and project savings overall, I've invited Ellis Katz from PMC and Eric Nixon and Jim Coulter from Dunn. Ellis was kind enough to prepare a short presentation for us where he can go over these topics, and then we'll kick it out to you guys for questions if you have any. So Ellis, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
All right. So do we want to, there we go. All right, we see it. I'll just turn it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you. Hello, everybody at the board and to the chair. My name is Ellis Katz. I want to give a little bit of quick background first about who we are. PMC stands for Project Management Consultants. We're a Cleveland-based owner's rep services firm. We manage for our clients projects from $5 million to $500 million, of all different types, around the country as owners reps for clients. Most of us are trained as architects or contractors. I'm a recovering architect, is what I like to say about myself. We were brought on board to handle the last 2 MCPL projects, which were Riverside and East Independence. And so I can only speak from the perspective of what we were retained for the project. I know this project's been going on for quite some time, and there's been a lot of projects that have been built successfully. And I'm hoping that this presentation will show you a good news story with regard to all of them, but I'm going to speak from the perspective of somebody that's coming in late in the game to these new projects. And to the left on the screen that you see is what we would do as an owner's rep, typically to help our clients with their development budgets. So we would work with our clients to develop everything, values for everything from the purchase of the land and the cost to purchase the land to the construction cost, which is specific to somebody like J.E. Dunn, to what we call owner hard costs, which in some jobs, the owner pays for permits, but we always carry a hard cost contingency. We cover the architect fees, the FF&E, which is buying the furniture, buying operating supplies, the signage, site signage, and then other consultants beyond the architect that are exclusive usually to the owner, such as testing consultants and things like that. Then down to legal, insurance, operational potential costs. And then what we do to protect our clients is we also have them carry a soft cost contingency. And the reason for these contingencies is to protect the owner should changes arise. I've been doing this for 40 years, and there hasn't been a single project that I've ever worked on that there wasn't something that occurred on a project that resulted in a change that an owner was required to write a change order for. And no project set of drawings is ever 100% perfect. In fact, if you follow AIA contracts or any contracts that we work on, and just as a side note, we're a wholly owned subsidiary of a construction law firm. So we actually write construction contracts, we write architectural agreements on behalf of our clients for projects. There's standard of care that sets a tone with regard to the level of completeness of documents, and no documents are ever 100% perfect. They just can't be. It's just the nature of the construction industry and the fact that you're dealing with sites that encounter things that you just don't expect. So things come up and they result in extra cost. If you can go to the next slide, please. When a contractor comes to a guaranteed maximum price, usually what that guaranteed maximum price document includes a lot of different things beyond just the contingency that you were describing in their agreement. It includes the cost for trade. So that's taking each different specification section. So from site clearing to concrete to structure to interior fit out, you get those trade costs, and then they get marked up with costs related to general conditions and staffing for their work effort. That's the cost to build the trailers, provide telephones to the site, hire the superintendents and the engineers that are going to manage working on the site and manage those subcontractors. Oftentimes, when you go to a guaranteed price, the documents are somewhere around 75% complete, or maybe sometimes, if you're lucky, they're 100% complete. So there's oftentimes allowances built into guaranteed maximum price contracts for things, and I'm giving you just a couple of examples where, removal of unsuitable soil that you just don't realize is existing. You try to do borings on a property, but you can't cover the entire surface of the land, and so you encounter things that you just didn't expect because you didn't do a boring there. Site dewatering, same kind of thing. You could dig into the ground in one spot and it's perfectly dry, and the next spot that starts filling up with water. Or even ceiling coordination issues. The beauty of today's market is everybody works in 3D, which has really helped reduce some of this exposure, but there still are potential coordination issues that come up during construction that you want to sometimes carry as an allowance. Allowances are meant to be used if these things come up. If they don't come up and you don't have to spend the money, that is another source of money that can come back to an owner if they're unspent. Same with construction contingency, which you clearly pointed out in the language in the agreement. If a construction contingency has not been fully spent, and by contract, a contractor is allowed to use it for things like buyout overages. If they just misestimated in their GMP that the project cost X and the sub came in at Y, they're allowed to use that contingency to pay for that overage. Misscope between trades, that happens a lot. It's a complicated project that things get mixed. A lot of times it's like between a mechanical contractor and an electrical contractor, things like that. Unexpected or unforeseen field issues. I'm just giving you a couple examples, like if the subcontractor improperly installed anchor bolts, for example, they weren't straight up and down, they realized it and they have to fix it, they are entitled to use their contingency to fix that. Or they underestimated the need for temporary enclosures or temporary heat. Things went a little longer, the season was a little worse or better than it was. They're allowed to use construction contingency to spend those dollars. And there's just a little diagram of how contractors can use contingencies. What you see for project owner and design firm in terms of contingencies, those are things that would have normally been in a development budget to cover. And those would be change order related work. Go to the next slide, please. In this situation, from our observation, the construction contingency doesn't cover it, and never does, owner directed changes or field changes in the field that were scope revisions. This would normally be covered by these owner contingencies. In your situation, you had no contingency. You were exposed dramatically, in my opinion, to having to be faced with consequences should something come up in the field that wasn't the fault of the contractor, but is a change that you'll have to deal with in terms of financing. at key points of a project, the owner is allowed to look at all the things I described above. So you can look at allowances, if there were any holds, which I believe J. Dunn didn't have holds on this project. If there were any use of the contingency that was spent, because you have the right to look at those funds and have a discussion with the contractor as to how they've been utilized, and if there is money that can come back to a project and utilized to pay for add alternates is what I would typically call them, or desired scope changes that you didn't really buy in the original part of the project, but now you have an opportunity because there was some savings. In your situation, you were able to take a look at each project as it was completed and find the total savings that was achieved in that project. So any buyout savings, any construction contingency savings, any allowance savings, and for that project, and apply them for other projects that you were going to be building. That proved, I believe, in your case, to be a tremendous benefit to building out the rest of your libraries, because as things went along, you encountered, and this is pre-PMC, but you encountered projects where you did have issues, where you needed funds and you had zero funds to pay for them out of your side of the budget. What Don agreed to do was to take those, and I think if you go to the next slide, we can talk about it a little bit more. But they with MCPL's predecessors before PMC got involved, were able to use these savings to pay for this extra work. And sometimes it was because of changes to the property, or you wanted to add something or enhance something. Even in our projects, and I'll explain a couple of them in the future slides, this helped you for your entire library system. And Dunn was to some degree taking a risk by offering you to be able to do this, because what happens when you run out of construction contingency for a contractor, if they run out of their construction contingency, they have to use their fee to pay for any future changes that they have to spend construction contingency on. You've been fortunate enough on the projects that you've been building that they did not have to have that kind of exposure. Next slide, please. So when we got on board, we learned about all of what was going on, and we understood there was a concern over contingency spend. So we asked J.E. Dunn to take their charts that they've been using to track this and basically add a new column that would show the transfer of monies from project to project to project to create this cumulative, call it it's not although it says contingency balance, it's really a balance of all available funds that have not been spent to date on the projects. And so if you look at the column with the big red arrow pointing down, to date, there is $689,730 of remaining balance of contingency, savings, unused allowances to be applied over the final projects that are going to be completed, which we believe is a really safe amount of money, and it actually allows you to explore some other possible alternatives in terms of implementing other add alternates that you might be considering on your projects. Next slide, please. So as it relates to our projects, and these are just some kind of current photos of Riverside and East Independence. The way when we took over, we said we needed a paper trail. I know there was a lot of stuff that happened before that were approvals for payments of funds in different manners was done either verbally or by email, or in some cases as a paper trail. I'm sure Dunn can show you all of that. But in terms of what we're managing, we're being very rigid about it. We're asking them to submit for formal approval letters or for change orders and for spending of contingency. We get those submitted to us. We review them to make sure the scope and the design intent is correct. And then we run those to MCPL and recommend for approval. To date on Riverside, we've approved or authorized through MCPL 20,241 of approved change orders. There is 64,380 of pending change orders on Riverside. And to give you an example of one of those pending change orders on Riverside, and it's kind of hard to see in the picture, But if you look to the left side of the building, the lighter color brick, there's a pole that's extending, a power pole that's extending above the roof line of that building. That power pole is right in the sight line of where your outdoor patio is. So we have an opportunity in talking to the utility company that we can move that power pole closer to the one that you see in the foreground. So there's about $20,000 to do that. That's in that pending value of the 64,388. Just to give you an example of some of the things we look at. On East Independence, we've formally approved $19,041, and there's a pending amount of COs of $138,353. In that case, we're actually adding a patio. One of them is actually adding a patio to East Independence. All that has been accounted for already. So the approved and the pending has been accounted. So when you look at the remaining balance of 689,730, it's outside of what's listed above. So we feel pretty comfortable, given that these projects are scheduled to be completed in the March, April time period, that there's enough money to cover any potential exposures that exist on the project past this date. I think that's my last slide. If you can go to one more slide just to make sure. Yes. Do you have any questions?
I do, but I want to make sure everybody has a chance to ask. And so just to clarify, oh, I'm sorry. Hold on.
Yeah. Morning. This is Ron. I'm one of the members of the board. I just have a general question, and I apologize ahead of time if it's kind of at a naive scope, but when you're formulating a bid, I'm assuming that for material, you've gotten some kind of a confirmation for the cost. And for labor, I'm assuming also they have some kind of a collective bargaining agreement by which you have a scale for the different labor services. And is that correct?
I'll let Jim or Eric respond on their deal.
Yes, that's correct. We follow prevailing wage order, and then the material costs are confirmed in their bids.
Okay, and then I'm also assuming that for professional fees like surveys and everything else like that, you have some kind of understanding as for the cost.
Professional fees are on Mid-Continent side, but yeah, I believe there's some agreed upon percentages, or they've provided.
Okay, so that if that's our cost, I wouldn't get involved with the bid. So what was mentioned is that you'd be doing some boring and core samples. And again, please correct me if I'm inaccurate. But I think within the scope of a project, these areas for example, price fluctuations for core samples wouldn't really be that material to be as much as 10% of the contract. Is that safe to assume?
Yeah, I think if we say price fluctuations, yeah, when we give a guarantee maximum price, that's the price of the project.
Okay, and then
without any changes.
Okay, then looking at the reasons for contingencies, you talked about adjectives like missed, unexpected, or unforeseen. And would it be safe for me to assume that things that are missed or unforeseen is something that would be pretty much at the risk of the contractor as opposed to the owner? I mean, that's why people are hired.
Right, that's correct. But with every guaranteed price or any kind of contract with a contractor, they have to protect themselves. And that's why there's language in contracts that allow for a contractor to carry a certain amount of construction contingency to protect them for their misses. Just like we would want to protect you with your owner and soft cost contingency. They can't be perfect. They're guaranteeing pricing. Like I said, I think before, maybe sometimes on not complete drawings, there's still a period of time where you have to prepare submission, project submittals, and things occur when you're doing project submittals that sometimes you don't expect. So,
okay, well, Elizabeth, that's a problem with the drawing. Is that our problem or the problem of the architect?
In some cases, it depends on the problem. On these projects, I haven't encountered, at least in the two that we've been working on, that there has been very many in terms of error, what you would call errors and omissions by the architect. If there is a situation where you have errors and omissions and you find that you're having to spend money because of an architect's error or omission, then you have to look at when did it happen? Why did it happen? Was there a reason that we had to either rip out work to fix the problem, or did it impact the schedule in any way? Because when you go into a situation where you might want to make a claim against an architect for errors and omissions, there's a term called betterment. And if an architect said, "Oh shoot, I forgot to show one more toilet in the restroom. Here's the extra toilet," and we didn't have that in the GMP. So now that extra, and I'm being very simplistic in my analysis, but let's say that toilet cost $2,000 to supply and install. If it didn't impact the schedule and it didn't require rework, then it's a betterment to the project to add the toilet, and you would have had to do that if they had shown it on their drawings in the first place. If they had to rip out the walls or have a delay to the project where there are extra costs associated with the error, that's where you can have a value or a claim to make against an architect. It's that difference. But I don't think we've had any situation to date that I'm aware of, at least on our two projects, where that's occurred, where there was an impact where betterment wasn't an issue. I hope that it's kind of a complicated subject, but I hope I explained it well.
Yeah, I wasn't really referring to the professional malpractice or negligence.
Okay.
To like an insurance claim as much as just simply a mistake. And it appears to me that the risk for that mistake is to be absorbed by the library through the contingency fund. And the example was given was two of them. One is the anchor bolts being askew when they were put in. It said, well, we got contingencies for that. Well, we're not doing the concrete work. We expect it to be done in the first place. So why should we have to use contingencies to cover somebody else's error? And another one too, just walking the site. If there's a electrical distribution pole in the way, I mean, who better would know that than the people who actually walk the site and prepare the architectural drawings?
I'll let Jim respond to the first one. But with regard to the pole, I don't think the pole in this case, this isn't a situation where it's just desired aesthetically to move the pole.
Sure, I agree, but okay.
You don't have to do it. So when that change order comes to the table of this board, if you don't want to spend the $20,000 to move the pole, we can leave it where it's at. That's why we're trying to create a methodology and a process so that every request for a change can be reviewed by MCPL prior to approval.
Okay, back to your example then about something that will have to be changed. If the anchor bolts are put in wrong, who has to pay to correct that?
That generally would be on the person installing the anchor bolts, but obviously.
Okay, that was the answer I was hoping for. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sometimes though, I'll speak for Jay Dunn. That's a simplistic one, but there are situations sometimes where they encounter an error in the field where it's hard to blame a sub where you make the sub do the repair. And that's why they have their contingency to cover those costs. Am I saying that correctly, Jim?
Correct.
Yeah, an error in the field that the library has to pay for, though.
No, the construction contingency, well, if there is savings, you get that back, but you're agreeing in the contract to allow them to use it to the full extent that it exists. And if they use it all up, they have to use their fee to pay for more. So it's not your money to keep and approve. They have the right by contract to use their contingency as they need to use it.
So then in the contract, the discretion to exercise use of that fund is vested in the contractor?
The construction contingency, yes.
Yeah.
But it is fully transparent. I mean, when we review every monthly pay application, we go through the contingency spend. it's a very transparent process, but yes, we get to use it how we deem necessary, but it's not intended to correct work that was improperly installed.
So Jim, just to, if I may, to back up to the power pole example, I mean, that's a change that I initiated, after a site visit. I just, I don't think it was really taken into consideration, but I think just it's a benefit to the public and improves the line of sight. And so that would be an example of an owner initiated
Sure.
change.
Okay, but then also you said transparent. Does that extend to having information with regard to these contingencies shared with the library or internally within the contractor?
Yes.
Shared with the library.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
I have some questions. Bob, Michelle, Yummy, you have any questions?
I guess I just want to make sure, I've never, as you all know, I used to build some residential housing, and we never dealt with this kind of a contract situation, contingencies. When I became aware of contingencies in commercial contracts was when I was a member of our school board. And so as I'm recalling some of those, the contingent, and let's assume there is an issue in question and you're talking about contingency. And I think probably I'm used to a 10% contingency at the completion of a project. But I think for the most part, at least I perceive that contingency as part of the payment being made under the original agreement to the contractor. And I think today, I guess we're going to get to that point, what does contingency actually refer to? And early on in this, I know we've got the $680,000 figure somewhere. But I think I understand that in my view from the past, and I never did it as an individual, that $689,000 in the absence of an agreement could be kept by the contractor. Is that correct?
No.
No.
100% of any savings gets returned to the owner.
Right.
That's positive. That's good. Because I really thought it was the other way, and that's positive. So I think that's really all because I was obviously thinking that was part of the original contract payment to the contractor. So all right, we'll just go on with whatever we're going to visit on this then.
Yummy, Michelle? If there's none, Alice, just to, we're all coming in late to the game. At least I am. Aaron is. And there were obviously findings that we weren't aware of, as I explained. So one of the questions that I have, and I appreciate what they've done in terms of the cost structure and the cost sharing, but I have this schedule here that refers to work packages, and again, this is on the April board docs, work packages that were approved by the board. So when I'm going to use my words loosely here, when you were moving contingency funds or savings to other projects, did the board approve that? And do we have costs that were incurred and paid on projects where the board never approved the maximum? And I don't know the answer to that. I expect you guys to answer the question right now. I think that's what comes to my mind. And it's honestly one of the reasons I brought this back to the agenda. Then people think I'm beating a dead horse, but this gets into how the library manages its projects and the contracts and who's accountable for changes and costs as we go along. And I don't know if we have an open issue here in terms of board approval or not, but it sounds like we do.
So Gordon, I've got an example just to make it simple. So at one point during the capital program, there was a decent amount of project savings from completed projects that were used in a work package to help offset the overall amount. So if we had 400,000 in total project savings today, 300,000 of that funded work package number 6. So if your GMP was supposed to be 8 million, it really was 7.7 million. So we used some of those project savings to help fund the capital plan. That would have been an instance that, yes, the board saw, viewed, and reviewed and approved that.
But I am not aware that the board is presented in that manner. Would that be fair to say?
I
don't think the board saw it. I'm not aware the board was presented the documents that our cost is going to be 8 million. We're going to take 300,000 from a previous project savings and we're going to, so the GMP are going to prove is 7.7.
I don't recall, Gordon, but I think it was, but I don't recall exactly.
Well, again, I'm just going off what the board was presented. So, and in some cases, again, that's on the April schedule. What the board approved didn't match the underlying detail, but again, that's some history and obviously some of the concern that I raised at the time. So, anyway, that it's just for perspective, and again. I carry this around, okay, as a reminder. The schedule was presented to the board month after month, actually to the building committee and the board, month after month. And this is an internal document, it's not yours. But the number that is on every one of these through the budget of the June 2022 meeting is 84.5 million. And the numbers don't add up. And the explanation was, I think, somewhat related to what you're talking about in terms of the contingencies and non-cash transactions. And then I found this document, which is the May 2020 construction, again, this came out of a work package presentation that the board did not see, but this is May 2020 where we're $8 million over budget. And the 84.5 million was history somewhere in 19. And so, again, I think there's an open question about whether the board has approved everything. I know, we can talk about that separately and outside of this session and figure out how to address that. So anyway, but I think Alice, I think you've covered the basis for us. I appreciate the detail. And I can't go back and undo what was done in 5 years, but and I'm pretty confident that we have, at least I'm confident that we have the right people managing this thing at this point.
Thank you.
All right.
Any other comments, questions? All right, thank you guys. You can exit and we'll get on to the next topic.
Good, thank you.
All right. Before we go to Lockton, we have a new staff member, right?
We do. I was going to do a formal introduction at the full board meeting, but now that you bring it up.
Well, it's the least, since we're here, but you don't have to do the full introduction, just,
With us is Sarah, who's our new legal services director. She comes by way of Blue Springs. Yes. I don't know, Jeremy, if you'd like to say a few words, or Sarah, if you'd like to give us a little bit of your background, either way, it's fine.
Sure. Excuse me. Several of us on the leadership team were on the panel that selected Sarah, and what I recall from those conversations was we all overwhelmingly agreed that she had a depth of knowledge of all the things that we were concerned about in terms of legal exposure for the library. So she has a lot of work with workers' comp cases, very comfortable in the resolution writing process and reviewing of policy. And so we all felt, that she would be a tremendous asset to our team in helping to fill that gap that we currently have on our staff.
I'm Sarah Carnes. Nice to meet you all. I've been practicing, gosh, I had to do math now. Close to 16, 15 years, something like that. And my entire career has been in public sector. So I have been very comfortable with all the functionings of a government entity, and I'm happy to be here and I'm learning. This is, I think, day 4 in the office because it's snow days, but I'm figuring it out. So I'm happy to be here.
Right here, glad you're here.
Thank you.
Okay. We have 2 representatives from Lockton, Jess Perez and Anthony Kovac. Finance Committee, recall there was a presentation in, was it November or December of the health insurance contract? Jennifer, when? November. Anyway, so one of the questions, I had some questions, and I just for background, I've been doing self-insurance for 30 years. Somewhat dangerous, but I know how things work. And my experience is more so in the professional liability and work comp arena than it is in health insurance. Although in work comp, the biggest cost in work comps is health matters. So I asked Aaron, we wanted to address this, and so Jess and Anthony are here to talk about the contract from a financial perspective. We're not going to talk about coverages and other things, but I want the board to understand, the structure of the contract, how the finance pieces work, and what I guess I'll call it our risk issues are in the contract. So I'll let you enter your introductions and take it from here.
Jess Perez, I'm an account executive with Lockton. I have been there for 11 years. I basically work with the library on the employee benefits coverages, not only medical, but also some of the ancillaries, dental, vision, life insurance, all that good stuff. So we typically meet 3 to 4 times a year. We have a planning session, we have a mid-year review, we have the renewal, and then if we need additional meetings or projections and things, we'll arrange for that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Anthony.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. My name is Anthony Kovac. I lead the actuarial services area on the benefits side at Lockton. I've been with Lockton a little over 10 years now. I've been in the group health space, actuarial space for about 20. And my role is really, helping forecast, budget, project those claim costs for the library going forward, along with negotiating any differences in where we see certain pieces of the contract with Blue Cross. For example, we'll get into the pooling charge. That would be something, that annual limit per member, we would help negotiate those rates for. And so with that, we can go ahead and start our presentation. The big thing is, I know Trustee Cook said self-insurance. While the library is in I would call it pseudo, we refer to it as a hybrid type funding arrangement. The reason being is that the cost plus arrangement is technically filed as fully insured with the states of Missouri and Kansas. The reason for that has to do with how Blue Cross recognizes their revenue and some of the components within the contract that make it more kind of more fully insured than self-funded. For example, when you are in a self-insured contract, typically you are going to pay those claims on a weekly basis. The carrier would pay for your claims the week before, then they would invoice the employer the week after for those claims that they've been paid. In the cost plus contract, Blue Cross actually their risk is the float. So they actually pay all the claims in January, for example, and then they don't bill the library till middle of February for those claims. So those are kind of the nuances, a little bit of differences. And some of those we'll get into a little bit more detail as we move on to the presentation. But every month you are going to get what we call a fixed cost bill at the beginning of the month. That includes the administrative fee. What that entails is the fee that Blue KC keeps to actually pay the claims on the library's behalf. The other piece of that is the pooling charge. So in self-funded world, that would be called stop loss because it's considered a fully insured contract with the state. They use the vernacular of pooling charge, similar to fully insured contracts do. So what that entails is that's the protection against your large claimants. In the past, the libraries, that limit has been 75,000. That has recently moved to 125,000. So what that means that, you pay for the insurance to protect the library against any of those catastrophic claims that would go above and beyond that 125,000. So with that, the library does have the risk of retaining all of the costs up to the 125,000 for every member on the plan. That is not just per enrollee or per employee, that includes spouses and dependents as well. And then the other piece of that is any of the Affordable Care Act taxes that are still in existence. Those are also included within that bill. If it was a self-funded world, you wouldn't pay that on a monthly basis. You would have an annual filing that the library would have to submit each and every year to the government. Blue Cross takes that off your plate because it is filed as a fully insured arrangement.
We've got an example of how the billing works a few pages back, but also with these programs, you'll find that a lot of the services are integrated, whereas with the self-funded concept, you can carve a lot of different things out. You can carve your pharmacy out, you could carve your stop loss out, but with the fully insured model, everything's really integrated with Blue Cross. So your care management, disease management, so employees that participate in diabetes program, asthma program, cancer programs, those types of things. The pharmacy is also integrated. And then as Anthony mentioned, the pooling is also within Blue Cross, which can be a perk because then you've got the cash flow advantage. On the self-funded side, if you have somebody that breaches that 125,000 specific stop loss level, you have to pay the money out, file a claim, and then wait for it to be reimbursed. Whereas with the fully insured contract, it's an immediate cash flow positive.
And that's very transparent on that monthly claims billing. So they will show you the overall, what we would call gross claim level. And then if there are any members that did surpass the 125,000 that reimbursement is needed, you would see that offset within the bill to get to what the net invoice is for the library.
And then we also included some considerations just to add additional flavor here for the contract purposes, but your payment component, so you guys will pay your claims experience, as Anthony mentioned, once a month. Blue Cross fronts those claims for you, and then you basically reimburse them the following month. And then you also have your fixed costs and access fees, which he mentioned, and that's going to be your flat rate that's due the first of the month that it's covering. So we'll go through that a little bit more as we continue on. The pooling, we've already talked about the individual pooling limit of 125,000. You also have an aggregate limit, which covers the entire plan. So if not from an individual perspective, but overall you have a terrible claims year, you also have an aggregate or cumulative limit that covers the entire plan. So you know that you'll have a maximum liability, you'll know what that is so that you can budget for it in case wheels just fall off the bus.
Yeah, and this is a component that is more similar to fully insured, not that the margin piece of it, but the run rate piece of it. So if you were truly self-funded and you did have aggregate protection, similar to the specific stop loss, you would have to file the claim and wait for the reimbursement. Well, aggregate doesn't come till after the year end. So it could be month 17 of a plan year that you get that reimbursement. Whereas in the cost plus contract, if, for example, the maximum liability for a full year was 4.8 million, you can never go over that run rate at any point in the year. So you can't go over the 400,000 in month one. You can't go over a total cumulative of 800,000 through month two, so on and so forth.
And that's the rolling monthly cumulative cap, which we're going to have a visual as we go forward on page 9 that we can kind of walk you through what that looks like. Some of the advantages on the cost plus program. So you have your own claim reserve. So you're only paying claims as they occur. So As we mentioned, your claims that are paid in January, you'll pay, Blue Cross is covering for the month of January. They're going to ask you to pay them back in February. But whereas with a fully insured, a normalized fully insured contract, you would pay a set premium each month. And if the claims ran well, the carrier wins, while you would also have that protection in the bad years. So this is a nice component where you guys actually get to keep the reserves in your own bank account versus paying those to Blue Cross. Along with those same lines with the claims, if you do have claims that run under the expected level, again, you're not paying those out to Blue Cross. They're staying in your bank account. We've talked about the monthly cap, which allows for easier budgeting and understanding what your maximum liability would be. And then reduced fees, reduced taxes. We talked about the ACA taxes. There were other taxes that were in place as a result of healthcare reform that are no longer applicable. Really, the PCORI, I believe, is the only one that's left.
Yeah, and it also has a reduction. This is, again, the nuance of the cost plus contract. If you're fully insured, you pay state premium taxes on the entire, dollar amount. Within the cost plus arrangement, the premium taxes are only associated with all those fixed cost component, which is a lot smaller percentage than the claims portion of the overall cost.
And then from a billing perspective, I know we've already talked about this, but again, the components of the billing, you have your admin bill that covers your fixed cost component. And then you also have a separate claims bill, which is referred to as a claims settlement statement that we have an example of. And then the monthly billing fees, as we've already talked about, you have the claims and the fixed costs. Any questions on any of the components of this?
And this is where we're going to start to get into more of the detail of each of those individual components. So any questions after each one, feel free to interrupt us. So if we move to slide 4, this is that pooling protection. So for those that are familiar with self-funded, this would be equivalent to stop loss. There are two pieces of your stop loss or pooling. One's the specific that protects against the large catastrophic claims, and then that aggregate that we had mentioned as well. Focusing on the specific protection, currently the library's pooling level is $125,000. So for any claimants that go above the $125,000 in a given year, the library's protected. Blue Cross is only going to invoice you up to the $125,000 in a given year. And you'll notice that it's a paid contract. What that means is as long as the claim has been paid in the 12-month period, in this case, you do work on a calendar year, as long as the claim is paid within that 12-month period, it gets subject to the $125,000. Now, for example, if one of those claims technically incurred or the time of the delivery of service was in 2023, and then it gets paid in 2024, that's going to be subject to the 2024 deductible. And so if there are any of those lingering claims out there that have taken many months to process, those do hit up against the deductible in the year that they end up getting paid by Blue Cross. And then the aggregate protection, again, this portion of the cost of the overall stop loss is very minimal compared to the specific protection. The aggregate protection, you can see the aggregate level is 25%. What that means is Blue Cross will do a claims projection based on your history and say, based on history, once we add claims trend, next year we think you're going to spend X dollars per employee per month. They're going to tack on a 25% margin onto that and say, okay, if you ever go over that level in total, and we'll have the total here in a couple slides, then the library does not have to pay any more claims beyond that total. Again, that's important on the run rate as well. They slice that by 12 months, and you can never get over that maximum in that 12-month run rate as pertaining to the contract. And then the other piece of that is there is a terminal liability coverage. We'll get into the details of that. But that only applies if you were to ever leave the Blue KC cost plus contract when that would apply. years that you continue to renew. It has no applicable coverage for you because everything else pays primary.
Any questions on that?
No, but I would just note this pay basis pooling level is different than how the work comp industry works, because that's on an occurrence basis. It's also on a service date. So a December 28th service would fall within if you had a December 28th, 23 service, medical service done, that would be under the 23, what I'll call the retention. So when I use words like retention and attachment point and excess, that's the same thing on the 125. But that is different, and so could mean you're spending more than.
Yeah, there is potential. In the stop loss world, there is the ability to purchase on an incurred contract. It's more expensive because it does cover, forever. I would say typically there usually isn't a lot of claims that have long lag periods. Typically, when you see the moving from year to year, it's going to be something that incurred in December that gets transferred over. But given the long range, if you look at over multiple years, there's usually not, it's pretty minimal of what gets left, what doesn't get covered.
And then on page 5, we just included a visual of kind of how the billing process works. Just some people like to see things visually versus just hearing. So as we talked about, the admin invoice, which we're going to go over those fees on the next page, will generate on the 20th of December. And this is assuming a January invoice. The invoice is due on the 1st of the month, so for that month of services. And then your claim statement, so those claims that were incurred, paid, all that good stuff, actually I should say paid in January, Blue Cross will introduce that statement on February 20th, and they actually give you till March 1st to pay that. So there's a nice cash flow advantage there on the claims piece.
And then as we look into the actual bill itself, slide 6 really looks at the admin portion, the one that you get at the beginning of the month. All of those fees are based on head count. When I say head count, based on employee head count that are enrolled in the plan, based on what tier they are in. There is no recognition of what plan. Granted, you do have, I think, one plan, but in carrier or clients that have more than one plan, that only usually pertains to the claims factors. But in the fixed costs, it doesn't matter what plan they're enrolled. These are the fees that Blue Cross charges in order to administer the plan in the various components. To give you some information, admin fee is to cover the overhead of actually processing the claims. The library or none of our clients would ever go out and buy their own claim processing system. So this is the fee that you're charging to do that on your behalf. The pooling fee is synonymous to the stop loss, as I mentioned. That's to cover the large claimants portion for the library. The taxes, if you were self-funded, truly self-funded, this would be the Corey tax for the Affordable Care Act. You can see it's pretty minimal. There used to be some additional taxes prior to 2017 that have gone away. And then the access fee is the fee they charge the library to have access to the overall Blue Cross national network to get the discounts that they achieve through negotiation. So you can see the total of that particular piece on an annual basis is a little over $1.06 million based on we're using the head count as of July when the renewal was done.
This is a month-to-month calculation.
This is a month-to-month calculation, yeah. So as the head count goes up or shrinks, that number is going to fluctuate. The annual number, as I mentioned, is just based on that July enrollment, that static number that we had. And then as you move to slide 7, this is where they do the calculation for the monthly limit. This is the aggregate protection that I referred to. This only comes into play if the run rate is going to go over that amount. Because as you can see at the bottom of the slide, part of the cost plus addendum is that the library is going to pay the lesser of whatever the actual paid claims are or the cumulative monthly claims limit. And that's the calculation that you can see above there. And so with that, again, using that July static number, the annual total would be roughly about 4.3 million. Now that number is going to be recalculated every month as well. There is a minimum that Blue Cross calculates within their contract. That's really just to protect them from employers that might divest a large portion of their population and they're stuck with the really risky piece. By no means is that a minimum that the library has to pay because of, you can see that they're always going to pay the lesser of whatever the actual paid claims are. Any questions on that? And so we combined all that together on slide 8 because I think one of the other questions really is what's the risk to the library? On the left side of this page, this is actually our own projection. Lockton doesn't just take the carrier's word for it. We do come up with our own projection to what we think is a fair maximum limit once you apply the 25% margin. And where we think total plan costs, again, based on that enrollment in July, we think it's going to come in around 4.3 million. The total funding was at 4.5 million. And on the right side, you can see that there is a maximum liability once you tag on all the fixed costs, the claim factors, and then you do get a little bit of an offset due to RX rebates. In the true self-funded world, you would have your own PBM contract or a pharmacy benefit manager contract, and you would get those rebates. Blue KC obviously has that PBM contract internally with Optum. So they're the ones that are actually receiving the rebates on your behalf, and they share some of that back with you in a credit to your claims bill on a quarterly basis. The way they apply that is on a per member per month number, and I think it's $28 per member per month is what we negotiated for the library, and you'd see that credit's worth about 160,000. So the overall total liability, assuming headcount didn't change, is a little bit over 5.06 million. We think you're going to come in at about 4.3 million. The total funding or budget is 4.5 million. So really the risk is the difference between your budget, the 4.5 million, and that 5.06 million that could occur.
Okay, and just interrupt. That's the number that I want from a finance structure and budgeting that has to be taken into consideration. So the board sees the budget. But my concern was, and again, I'm glad we have an aggregate. So the consideration for the budget process is, if we're funding at 4.5 million, we have to be aware of the fact that it could be 5.1 or higher, depending on what staff count is, because again, that fluctuates and that number will go up and down. Anyway, so I think that's. Want to make that point. All right.
Yep. And then slide 9 really gives you just an example of that claim settlement, how I talked about how they use the ongoing run rate. They do calculate that monthly claim limit each and every month, and just to show how everything can carry over. For example, in January 2023, your claims limit was calculated at $313,752. But your actual claims actually came in at 317,000. So it did save you, about 4,000 for that particular month. And then that does get reapplied once it gets caught up, which you did in the second month. And then you never went past the run rate for the maximum liability again. So That's just an example of how the claim settlement works. Moving to slide 10, this only applies if you were to ever leave Blue KC and the cost plus contract. There is a terminal liability fee for Blue KC. When you're paying the admin cost, that's for them to administer the claims on your behalf. They do charge if you were to leave as part of their trying to retain their business. They're going to charge you for them to continue to process those claims on your behalf, even though you've left, their organization. Within that service fee, they do charge 10% of the claims paid. That's different than the claims billed. And then they also charge you an additional 10% of the discounts they achieve through their negotiations. What that really pertains to, this is equivalent to what you saw in the fixed cost bill of the admin and the access fee. This is how they're charging the admin and access fee for those run out claims if you were to ever leave the organization. We'd estimate that if you were to leave at the end of this year, for whatever reason, not that we would recommend that, it would be roughly about $115,000 based on your history. And coinciding with that is number 11. Okay, well, how do we protect ourselves in terms of the stop loss portion of that as well? I think back to Trustee Cook's comment on the incurral piece. If we're only paying stop loss on paid, if you're to leave, you do have aggregate protection on that on those claims. You can see that actually calculates out to, on the bottom of slide 11, around $530,000. What that means is that's the max you would pay in rent out to Blue Cross is the $530,000. If for whatever reason you had $1 million claimant in the January after you were to leave, you'd get capped at the $530,000 and you'd be done. Blue Cross would take on all the other risk. We do provide you with a run out estimate IBNR at the end of your fiscal year, and based on history, in trending that forward, we'd expect your actual run out to be somewhere around $200,000 to $250,000 in claims. And then moving to slide 12, I think this is the bullet point. Well, before we get to bullet point 2, I think of our agenda. I don't know if anybody had any questions on bullet point 1.
Coming, Michelle. Go ahead.
Moving to bullet point 2 is how does Lockton get compensated? Well, there are actually you know this more than I do. I can speak to the Blue KC piece, but I can't speak to the others.
No, so we're really net of commission on the majority of the ancillary products, and then on the medical we have a flat monthly fee that's paid. And so for 2023 it was $2,160 per month. For 24 it's $2,165 per month. So it is just a flat fee, and that's what we're paid in commission. And then there's a little bit that's tied to the pet insurance and then the legal and ID shield. So the top portion is our base commission. And then the bottom portion is bonus or supplemental commission. So these commission rates at the bottom are not directly tied to Mid-Continent. It's based on the amount of business that Lockton as a whole has with certain carriers. And so each year we provide Mid-Continent with this compensation letter. So this actually I pulled from the letter that we provide typically in January. And so this is what we had provided last year as an estimated compensation for the bonus or supplemental program that we expect at that point in time. And so for last year, we were expecting $85,000 approximately for that bonus compensation through that program, but it does again fluctuate depending on if our clients end up terminating with Blue Cross and going to a different carrier or.
So Jess, this is all, so MCPL is a piece of this 85, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, it's not 85 for this program.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, it's based on all clients that Lockton has.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, and so the direct payment from the library that actually comes to Lockton through Blue KC is the top portion.
So they're paying you, we're just paying it through the monthly, that monthly
Yep.
admin fees. Okay,
Yep.
right.
Yep, so, and that totals, I just added up for 2023, a little over $27,000. And like I said, that's the annual amount, so divide that by 12 is what your monthly amount is. That's directly paid to us. Any questions on that?
Ron or Bob?
No.
Michelle, are yummy? Jennifer,
I'm
any
good.
comment?
It's hard. You gotta give us a minute to unmute.
Oh, sorry.
I'm good.
This was more than I expected, and thank you. This was great, very helpful. And again, the primary focus was on what I'll call the risk element in terms of understanding the aggregate and what's being budgeted, and how that can change. But and there's a labeling issue. I think there's a labeling issue that when I say self-insurance, I use it generically.
Right.
This structure is labeled something different. So anyway, we'll figure out how to call it what it is, or something that is more so closer to what the actual structure.
Yeah, it's actually funny that you say that, because even Cost Plus, the name that Blue KC uses, there are other Blues associations that have the Cost Plus product, but it's completely different. So it is what it is. That's why we refer to it as a hybrid, because it does have components of each. At the end of the day, you do pay your own claims. So you're not subject to the margins that the carriers put in for that portion.
Aaron?
Thank you so much.
Anyway, thank you.
Great job.
Appreciate it very much. So,
Thank you.
and you're welcome. I said, welcome to Exit.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. I guess next up is Jeremy?
Financial report.
Yes.
Very good. You'll notice in this monthly financial report, we made a few cosmetic changes, hopefully to provide a little bit more context to the financial scope for the library, as well as help separate, different things. One of the things that we did to the balance sheet, just for context, was add the balance at the end of the fiscal year. So that's the first column you'll see there. The middle box is all of the governmental funds balance sheet. And then as we were showing prior, we also have last year's balance sheet just for comparison purposes. And so
when you say last year, you're talking about just the comparable current period.
Right.
Right. Okay.
So I'll draw your attention to our cash and investments, as that's a ongoing concern for the library. Our cash and investments a year ago, so December 31st, 2022, was just a little bit more than $46 million. Our cash at December 31st, 2023 was $32.9 million, so roughly a $13 million drop in cash 1 year compared to the next. However, our cash at the end of November, so a month ago, was $22.6 million, and it's now $32.9, as I just said. So that influx in cash from the revenues we received from the 3 counties is what allowed us to pay off the $3 million that we had borrowed, which is why the bank loan no longer shows on the balance sheet. The interest that was paid to the bank was $23,437.50. And that loan has been paid off. So those are all of my remarks on the balance sheet. I'd be happy to answer any questions or move on. Okay. The next schedule on the slide is the general fund. This one looks fairly similar to the last one, but we've grouped the items. So all of the current month items are in box 1, the year-to-date items are in box 2, and then our budget is in box 3. we'll note that for revenue, we've collected $22.9 million, which is roughly 38% of our budget. I went back and looked at last year, the 20.7 million was roughly 37.9%. So we're tracking just a bit better than we were compared to a year ago. And then on the expenditure side, you'll note that payroll is right at our budget at 18.1 million. We're just under 50% of budget spent. Library materials is at $4.6 million, which is 43% of the budget. Library programs are at 408,000, which is about 42% of the budget. And then on the next page, library operations is at 4.6 million, which is just under 41% of the budget. Excuse me. So our total expenses year to date are 27.9 million, which is just under 47% of our budget. So I feel like we're, pretty well on track with where we had intended to be, which is always a good thing, right? So the difference between revenue and expenditures is $5 million. However, we did have that transfer from the general fund to the capital project fund of $9 million. So when we take into account that transfer plus the money we've earned on interest, our year-to-date change in fund balance is 13.7 million. We've added, for context, the fund balances in the budget document versus what they are currently. So you'll see when the budget was put together, we thought fund balance would be about 25.6 million. When the audit was completed, it was actually a little over 28 million. So with that current year loss, we're sitting at a fund balance around 14.4 million right now. Moving on to the next page. This is a little bit different than what we've shown in the past. Because we do a complete schedule on the capital plan, I felt like this would be a good time to separate the capital project fund from the capital plan. So the first column on this sheet is the adopted budget. The next column is our year-to-date expenditures through December 31st, and then the amended budget at the back end so that we can compare our current expenditures to our amended budget. You'll note that Harvey Jones has been added. That was the 55,000 the board approved last month. So our current year-to-date expenditures over revenue is 8.7 million. However, I did mention that $9 million transfer in plus our interest income. We actually have a positive increase in the capital project fund of $757,000. So you'll note that the fund balance that we had planned on has been increased by 757,000 just year to date. No questions there. This one really didn't change. This is all of the grant and gift fund activities. So you'll see the ones that have activity are noted above, and then all the ones that have no activity for the year are noted below that. And then at the bottom of that schedule, we have an accounting of our revenues and expenditures in the aggregate. And then the last schedule, this didn't really change all that much, really just more formatting changes, but our self-funded health insurance is an enterprise fund under the government accounting standards. So we have a statement of net position and our statement of activities. And you'll note that the amount that we've paid out in expenses is just over around 103,000 more than what we've collected in revenue year to date. And so you'll note that on our balance sheet as well. Those are.
I have a question on this. This is at least in the financial report, is a proprietary. Is this totally separate from the other balance sheet?
Yeah, those were governmental funds, and this is the proprietary.
So the what's labeled cash in the report, the annual report is labeled cash and investments. So what is this 1.5 million?
The cash in the enterprise fund.
So is that earning interest? Is it?
Yes, it's earning interest. It's in our bank.
Is it a separate bank account?
I don't believe it is. I think it used to be, but several years ago, the library merged the two.
So I'm commingling the funds, but I'm keeping a separate accounting,
Right.
correct? So should
That's
this-
true of all our funds.
Okay. So should this 1.5 million be credited with some, I don't know, and again, this, I'm not going to tell you, I know the government accounting rules, but I don't know that it in the end, but there's interest earned on this 1.5 million that doesn't show up here, correct? So our true cost of the health insurance plan, since we're sitting with the float, is actually less than what we're presenting. Is that fair?
I'm not sure.
Well, if this is sitting in the central bank account and they're paying a money market rate on it, and just for the sake of rounding, so let's say that money market rate has been 5% and I have 1.5, so I should have about 75,000 of income on an annual basis. And I'm glad to hear we get the float from Blue Cross. I find that interesting, but regardless, that's the contract. So when I look at, when I look at our cost of 4.5, that's in the budget, I have income being earned on this allocated asset, allocated cash that is being retained by the general fund. That's the way I think I understand it.
Sorry, I'm not following.
Well, if you have commingled cash, right? So the 1.5 is sitting over in the same bank account as the 9.9 million in the general fund. So if I looked at the bank account or the bank reconciliation, I'd have, 11.5 million?
Yeah, I'll have to check with
Okay.
Juan. I'm not sure what his allocation of interest is.
Okay. I'll let you, okay, let's keep going.
I think that's all I have on the financial statement. Unless there are other questions. Now we can move on to the cash flow. There was no update, so this is the same report you saw last month. And due to timing, 7.3, we did not have the investments in time to meet the deadline for this meeting, so that'll be updated next month as well. The next one is the personnel schedule. Sorry, yeah, I just said there wasn't.
Okay.
The footnote at the bottom says it'll be updated next month.
Okay.
The next one is the personnel schedule. If there's no questions there, the last one's the capital plan.
Which we, pretty much already talked about.
Right.
So,
Everything is still on track with what we shared last month.
okay.
That is all I have, unless there are any questions.
Okay, thank you. I like the format changes. Thank you. Michelle, any questions, comments? Hearing none? Is there any other business anyone has to bring? Aaron? No? Thank you all. Yami and Michelle, thank you for your time. You're still there, I hope?
I'm still here.
Yeah, we're still here. Thank you.
Just checking. All right, well, if there's none, then I will ask for a motion and a second to adjourn. So move.
Second.
Second.
And Teresa, will you just take the vote?
Ms. Michelle Wykoff,
Aye.
Ronald Pease,
Yes.
Dr. Yummy Pandolfi,
Yes.
Mr. Gordon Cook.